M4 Sherman, what they don't tell you. The M4 Sherman killed more American soldiers than it saved. That's not an opinion. That's what the crews who had to fight in them actually believed. And what you're about to learn will change everything you thought you knew about this tank. Before we dive into the details of this American masterpiece, make sure to like and subscribe. Everyone thinks they know the Sherman story. American tank, won the war, beat the Germans through sheer numbers, but that story leaves out the dark parts. The parts the history books don't want to talk about. The parts that kept Sherman crews awake at night, knowing that tomorrow they might climb into a steel coffin that could turn into an inferno in seconds. This is the real story of the M4 Sherman, and it starts with a lie. The lie was simple. American generals told their tank crews that the Sherman was a good tank, that it could compete with German armor, that if they followed their training and used proper tactics, they'd be fine. But the crews knew different. They knew it from the first time they saw a Panther tank destroy 3 Shermans before any of them could even get close enough to fire back. They knew it when they watched their friends burn alive, because the Sherman's ammunition storage turned every hit into a potential death sentence. They knew it when they realized that facing a German Tiger meant you needed 5 Shermans to have a chance, and 4 of them probably weren't coming back. Let me tell you about a guy named Sergeant Lafayette Pool. He was one of the best Sherman commanders in the entire war. His crew destroyed over 250 enemy vehicles. He survived battle after battle, becoming a legend among American tank crews, but even he couldn't escape the Sherman's fundamental problem. On September 19, 1944, his tank was hit by German fire. The ammunition inside exploded. Poole lost his leg. His loader was killed instantly. This happened to the best of the best. Now imagine what happened to average crews. But here's where the story gets interesting, and this is what they don't teach you in school. The Sherman wasn't a bad tank because American engineers were stupid. It wasn't a bad tank because the military didn't care about their soldiers. The Sherman was the way it was because of a choice, a calculated decision made at the highest levels of command. And understanding that choice is the key to understanding why the Sherman became the most controversial tank of World War II. It's 1940. The United States isn't in the war yet, but everyone knows it's coming. The Army looks at its tanks and realizes they're in trouble. The M3 Lee, their newest tank, is already outdated before it even enters production. It's got this weird design with the main gun mounted in the hull instead of a rotating turret. It's tall, making it an easy target. And it's already clear that by the time America enters the war, they're going to need something better. So the Army puts together a team. Engineers, military strategists, tank experts. Their job is to design the tank that will win the war. And right from the start, they're faced with a problem that will define everything that comes after. See, the Army knows what kind of tank would be ideal. Heavy armor, big gun, able to go head-to-head with anything the Germans have. But they also know something else. Germany has been building tanks for years. They've got factories set up. They've got experience. They've got a head start. If America tries to match them tank for tank, quality for quality, they'll lose. Not because American engineers aren't good enough, but because they're too far behind. By the time America builds the perfect tank, the war might already be over. So they make the choice. They decide to build a tank that's good enough. Not great, not the best, just good enough to do the job and simple enough to build in massive numbers. They're betting everything on quantity over quality. They're betting that 5 medium tanks will beat 1 heavy tank. They're betting that reliability and numbers will win the war. And you know what? They're not completely wrong, but they're also not completely right. The M4 Sherman goes into production in 1942, and American industry does what American industry does best. They build them everywhere. Chrysler is building them. Ford is building them. Pacific Car and Foundry is building them. At the peak of production, America is cranking out over 2,000 Shermans per month. By the end of the war, they've built almost 50,000 of them. For comparison, Germany built about 6,000 Panthers and only 1,347 Tigers during the entire war. The Sherman has a lot going for it. It's powered by different engines depending on who built it, but most use a reliable radial aircraft engine or a multi-bank engine made from 5-car engines welded together. Sounds crazy, but it works. The tank is mechanically reliable in a way that German tanks can only dream about. A Sherman can drive 100 miles without breaking down. A Panther, it might break down after 20 miles. The Tiger was even worse in terms of reliability. The Sherman has good speed for a medium tank. It can hit about 25 to 30 miles per hour on roads, sometimes faster downhill. That's pretty quick for 30 tons of steel. It's also relatively easy to drive compared to other tanks of the era. The controls are smooth. The transmission is reliable. The crew positions are well thought out. The gunner has decent optics. The commander has good visibility from his position. Compared to Soviet tanks, which are cramped and miserable, or early German tanks, which have their own problems, the Sherman is actually pretty comfortable. The main gun in early Shermans is a 75. It's the same gun the Germans use on their Panzer IV, so it should be fine, right? And in North Africa in 1942 and 1943, it is fine. American Shermans fight German Panzer IIIs and Panzer IVs, and they do okay. The tactics work. American crews start getting confident. They start thinking maybe this tank is actually pretty good. Then everything changes. D-Day happens. June 6, 1944. American forces land in Normandy and start pushing inland. And this is where the Sherman's problems really start to show. The French countryside isn't like the deserts of North Africa. It's full of hedgerows, these thick walls of dirt and vegetation that line every field and road. They're like natural fortifications, and the Germans are dug in, waiting. The hedgerows do something nobody expected. They turn tank combat into close-range ambushes. In the desert, you could see the enemy coming from miles away. In the hedgerows, you might not see a German tank until you're 100 yards away from it, and at that range, every weakness of the Sherman becomes deadly. Here's what happens. A Sherman column is moving down a narrow road between hedgerows. They can't see more than 50 yards ahead. Suddenly, there's an explosion. The lead tank is hit. It's blocking the road. The other tanks can't move forward and can't turn around. They're trapped. And somewhere in the hedgerows, invisible, is a German Panther or a Panzer IV with a long 75 gun, picking them off one by one. The Sherman's 75 gun can't penetrate the frontal armor of a Panther at any range. It can barely scratch it. The Panther's gun can punch through a Sherman's armor from over 1,000 yards away. The Sherman crews know this. They know that if they see a Panther, their only chance is to try to flank it, get around to the side or rear where the armor is thinner. But in the hedgerows, flanking is almost impossible. And then there's the other problem. The problem that makes grown men hesitate before climbing into their tank in the morning. The problem that gives them nightmares. The Sherman has a tendency to catch fire when it's hit. Not every time, but enough times that crews have noticed. Enough times that they've given the tank a nickname. They call it the Ronson, after the lighter company whose slogan is "Lights first time, every time." Some crews call it the Tommy Cooker. British crews have their own name for it. They call it the Ronson as well, but they also call it other things I can't repeat here. Why does it catch fire so easily? The early Shermans store their ammunition in racks on the sides of the hull, right where they're likely to get hit. When a German shell penetrates the armor, it often hits these ammunition racks. The shells explode. The explosion causes other shells to explode. The whole thing becomes a chain reaction. The crew has seconds to get out maybe, usually not even that long. Imagine being a Sherman crew member. You're sitting in this tank, surrounded by high explosive shells, knowing that if you get hit in the wrong spot, you're going to die in fire. And there's nothing you can do about it. You can't add more armor. You can't get a bigger gun. You just have to climb in every morning and hope that today isn't the day. The crews start doing things to try to improve their odds. They weld extra armor plates onto the front of their tanks. They pile sandbags on the hull. They attach spare track links to the armor, anything to add a few more inches of protection. Most of this doesn't actually help much, and it makes the tank slower and puts more strain on the engine, but it makes the crews feel like they're doing something. Some crews refuse to load a full ammunition load. They'll only carry 50 or 60 rounds instead of the full 90, figuring that fewer rounds means less chance of a catastrophic fire. The problem is, that also means they might run out of ammunition in the middle of a battle. The Army knows there's a problem. They're not stupid. Reports are coming back from the front lines. Crews are complaining. The casualty rates are getting hard to ignore, so they start working on fixes. One of the first things they do is try to upgrade the gun. They develop a version of the Sherman with a 76 gun. It's longer, more powerful, better at penetrating armor. It's not as good as the German guns, but it's an improvement. The problem is, when they first offer this new Sherman to the crews, many of them don't want it. Why? Because the 76 gun has a slower rate of fire and the high explosive shells aren't as good. In Normandy, Sherman crews are doing a lot more than just fighting tanks. They're supporting infantry. They're destroying bunkers and buildings. They're firing at targets they can't even see, just shooting at areas where Germans might be hiding. For that kind of work, the 75 gun with its better high explosive shell is actually more useful. It's not until the crews start running into more and more Panthers and Tigers that they begin demanding the 76 version. By then, it's late 1944, and the war is more than halfway over. The Army also develops a version called the Sherman Jumbo. It's got much thicker armor, thick enough to actually stop German tank rounds from the front. But it's heavier and slower, and they don't build very many of them. Most crews never see one. The other fix they come up with is changing where the ammunition is stored. In later Shermans, they move the ammunition to the floor of the tank and surround it with water jackets. This is called wet storage, and it actually works. Shermans with wet storage are much less likely to catch fire when hit, but this change doesn't happen until late 1944, and even then, it takes months for the new tanks to reach the front lines. Thousands of crews are still fighting in the old dry storage Shermans. Let me tell you about a specific battle that shows what Sherman crews were dealing with. It's called the Battle of Aracourt, September 1944. The U.S. 4th Armored Division is pushing into France, and they run into a German Panzer brigade. The Germans have about 260 tanks, mostly Panthers and Panzer IVs. The Americans have about 200 Shermans. On paper, the Germans should win this easily. The Panthers are better tanks in almost every way, but the Americans have advantages the Germans don't. Their tanks are all fully fueled and maintained. The German tanks are running on fumes, and many of them are breaking down. The Americans have better radios and communication. Their crews are well trained and they work together as a team. The Americans also have air support, which the Germans definitely don't have. The battle lasts for several days. When it's over, the Germans have lost over 200 tanks. The Americans have lost about 25. It's a massive victory, and it shows something important. The Sherman wasn't just about the tank itself. It was about the entire system around it. The logistics, the air support, the training, the coordination. Put all those things together and the Sherman could win, even against better tanks. But here's the thing. The Sherman crews still paid a heavy price. 25 tanks lost might not sound like much compared to 200, but each of those tanks had a crew of 5 men. Some of them made it out. Many of them didn't. And every single crew in that battle knew that if their tank got hit, they might not have time to escape before it caught fire. There are stories from the War of Sherman crews becoming so scared of their own tanks that they refused to close the hatches. They'd rather risk getting shot by a sniper than be trapped inside if the tank catches fire. Some commanders have to order their men to close the hatches, and even then, the crews will open them again the second the commander isn't looking. There's this one story about a Sherman crew in the Battle of the Bulge. Their tank gets hit and starts burning. The driver and co-driver escape through the front hatches. The commander and gunner get out through the turret, but the loader, he panics. He can't find the hatch in the smoke and confusion. By the time the others realize he's still inside, it's too late. They can hear him screaming, but there's nothing they can do. The tank is an inferno. That kind of thing happened more often than anyone wants to admit. And it happened because of choices made in 1940 and 1941, choices about what kind of tank America was going to build. Now let's talk about something that's going to sound crazy. Despite everything I just told you, despite the fires and the weak armor and the inadequate gun, the Sherman was probably the right choice for America. I know that sounds insane, especially after all those stories about crews burning alive, but hear me out. Germany built better tanks. The Panther was legitimately an excellent tank design. The Tiger, despite its reliability issues, was a beast in combat, but Germany couldn't build enough of them. They were too complicated, too expensive, too difficult to maintain. A single Tiger took about 300,000 man-hours to build. A Sherman took about 10,000 man-hours. Germany also couldn't supply the tanks they did build. They didn't have enough fuel. They didn't have enough spare parts. They didn't have enough trained crews to replace the ones they lost. Meanwhile, America was pumping out thousands of Shermans, and every one of them had fuel, spare parts, and a trained crew. When an American tank broke down, it got fixed. When a German tank broke down, it often got abandoned because there were no parts to fix it with. This is the brutal math of the Sherman. Yes, it took 5 Shermans to reliably knock out a Tiger, but America had 5 Shermans to send. Germany didn't have 5 Tigers. They barely had one. And even if they did have one, it might run out of fuel before it reached the battlefield, or its transmission might break, or it might get destroyed by an American fighter bomber before it ever saw another tank. The Sherman also did things that don't show up in tank versus tank statistics. It carried infantry. It supported attacks. It destroyed fortifications. It provided mobile artillery. It did 100 different jobs beyond just fighting other tanks, and it did them reliably, day after day, in every condition, in every part of the world. American Shermans fought in the deserts of North Africa where temperatures reached 120 degrees. They fought in the frozen forests of the Ardennes where it was 20 below zero. They fought in the jungles of the Pacific where the humidity made everything rust. They fought in the mountains of Italy on roads so narrow that one tank could block an entire column. And they kept working. There's also something else that doesn't get talked about enough. The Sherman could be repaired. When a Sherman got damaged, you could fix it. You could replace the engine in a few hours. You could swap out a broken track. You could patch armor. Crews got really good at field repairs, fixing their tanks under fire and getting back into the battle. German tanks, not so much. The Panther's engine was so complicated that replacing it required special equipment and took days. The Tiger's overlapping road wheels would freeze up in winter, and fixing them meant removing half the suspension system. German crews would sometimes abandon perfectly good tanks just because they were too difficult to repair in the field. And here's maybe the most important thing. The Sherman could cross bridges. That sounds stupid, right? But think about it. Europe is full of rivers. Rivers have bridges. Most of those bridges were built hundreds of years ago. They weren't designed to hold 60-ton Tigers, but a 30-ton Sherman, no problem. German heavy tanks got stuck on their own side of rivers all the time because the bridges couldn't support them. They'd have to find a ford or wait for engineers to build a new bridge. And by then, the Shermans were already across and pushing inland. So when you look at the big picture, when you look at the entire war instead of just individual battles, the Sherman starts to make sense. It's not the tank you'd want if you had to fight a Panther one-on-one. But it's exactly the tank you'd want if you had to invade a continent, supply an army across an ocean, and keep fighting for 3 years straight. But that doesn't mean the crews were happy about it. That doesn't mean they didn't spend every day wishing they had better armor and a bigger gun. And it definitely doesn't mean the men who died in burning Shermans died for a good reason. They died because of choices made by people who never had to climb into a tank themselves. Let me tell you about one moment that sums up the entire Sherman experience. It's March 1945. The war is almost over. The Germans are retreating on all fronts. An American Sherman unit is pushing through a German town when they round a corner and come face to face with a King Tiger, the biggest, baddest tank the Germans ever built. The King Tiger's gun is already pointed at them. The American crew knows they're dead. Their 76 gun can't penetrate that thing from the front. Not at this range. Not ever. The gunner fires anyway, more out of reflex than anything else. The shot bounces off the King Tiger's armor like a rock off a castle wall. The King Tiger fires back. Misses. It's a miracle. The German gunner probably panicked. The American crew doesn't wait around to see if he gets a second shot. They reverse at full speed back around the corner out of the line of fire. They radio for help. Within minutes, 3 more Shermans arrive. Then 5 more. Then 10. They coordinate. Some tanks provide covering fire while others maneuver for side shots. One Sherman gets hit and starts burning. The crew escapes. Another Sherman gets a lucky shot on the King Tiger's track, immobilizing it. Now the Americans can flank. They pour fire into the Tiger's sides and rear. It takes 17 hits before the King Tiger stops moving. The American commander climbs out of his Sherman and walks over to look at the destroyed German tank. He sees his shells bounced off the front armor, barely scratched it. He sees the bodies of the German crew inside. He sees his own burning tank, his friends being pulled out with burns covering their bodies. And he thinks about how this is exactly what the generals told him would happen. Send enough Shermans and you'll win. Eventually. He's alive. He won the fight. But 4 of his friends aren't going home. And that King Tiger, that incredible machine that took 17 tanks to kill, was being driven by a crew of teenagers who probably joined the army 6 months ago because they had no choice. The Germans are out of fuel, out of supplies, out of time. The war is basically over, and men are still dying because the Sherman wasn't quite good enough. That's the Sherman story. Not heroic, not simple, just brutal math and impossible choices and young men doing their best with what they were given. So what's the truth about the M4 Sherman? It's complicated. It was the right tank for America to build. It probably won the war, or at least it contributed massively to winning the war. American industry deserves credit for producing 50,000 of them and getting them to every front where they were needed. But it was also a deeply flawed machine that got thousands of men killed. Crews knew they were driving death traps, and they did it anyway because that was their job. Many of them didn't come home. Many more came home with burns and scars and nightmares about being trapped inside a burning tank. The Sherman represents a specific American approach to war: overwhelming industrial power, quantity over quality, pragmatic engineering over perfection, good enough to get the job done even if it's not the best. And that approach worked. America and its allies won the war. But if you were a 19-year-old kid from Ohio, sitting in a Sherman at 100 yards from a Panther, knowing your gun couldn't hurt it but its gun would tear through you like paper, all that grand strategy didn't matter much. What mattered was surviving the next 5 minutes. And for too many Sherman crews, those 5 minutes were their last. The Sherman wasn't the best tank of World War II. It might not even be in the top 5, but it was there. It showed up. It fought. And in the end, that's what mattered. History remembers the winners, and the Sherman was on the winning side. But the men who fought in them remember something different. They remember the fear, the fires, the friends who didn't make it out. And they remember a tank that was just good enough to win the war but not quite good enough to bring everyone home. If you want to see what actually beat the Sherman, check out the next video.